Thank you, Kenji. So one of the distinct honors that I was able to have as editor for Hiroshi on this book project was to write an introduction for him and to the book for readers that may not know too much about him. I'd like to read from that introduction a little bit as a way to fill in a little bit of context into Hiroshi's life, the significance of his writing, and as a way to introduce Hiroshi to you all once again for his reading. So the title of my piece is called Hiroshi Kashiwagi, A Disquieted American. For over 80 years, Hiroshi Kashiwagi has been quietly building an eclectic and accomplished career in the arts as a playwright, poet, performer, and librarian. As a Nisei, Kashiwagi has lived through the major eras of Japanese American history, most notably the community's wartime incarceration after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. Because of the choices he made as a young man while confined at Tule Lake in resistance to the government's infamous loyalty questionnaire, Kashiwagi has carried a stigma for the remainder of his life, one that has hung over him like a dark cloud. No boy. As a Nisei writer, his work belongs on the shelf with notables like John Okada, Isae Yamamoto, Wakako Yamauchi, Yoshiko Uchida, and Toshio Mori, the foundations of Japanese American writing. He has been celebrated for his courage to, in the words of Frank Chin and Jeffrey Paul Chan, write beyond the stereotype of the Japanese American internee as helpless, innocent victim, and to explore the dark side of Japanese America. As a playwright and actor, he was influential in the origins of Japanese American and Asian American theater, performing with fellow community members in the Tule Lake Little Theater, in groups he helped found, like the post-war Nisei Experimental Group, and in early Asian American theater company productions. Commenting on his influence, the acclaimed playwright Philip Kongo Tanda has called Kashiwagi seminal to the whole lineage of Japanese American playwrights. Furthermore, as a living testament to the injustices 120,000 people of Japanese ancestry faced during the war, he has been called upon by generations after him to bear witness to the past, to speak out and educate others on the importance of civil liberties and on the lessons to be learned from elders, all the while trusting his story to those who, in Kashiwagi's words, seek the history from those of us who lived it. And yet beyond his significance to younger artists, activists, community members who have looked to him for a sense of legacy, Kashiwagi's expression has been driven by something deeply personal, a struggle to live and write on his own terms in light of his disquieting past. Since the war years, the writer and performer has pursued numerous projects, including his play The Betrayed, his autobiographical multi-generic Swimming in the American, which won the American Book Award, as well as his recent collection of poetry, Ocean Beach, each largely committed to examining the difficult conditions and painful choices imposed upon him, his family, and his fellow Japanese Americans by the U.S. government during and after the Pacific War. Well over half a century after the war ended, even though Kashiwagi never fought, his writings can still be read as a search for a sense of peace, one that history has denied him. This book, starting from LOOMIS and Other Stories, is his latest project. It is a memoir, a cycle of stories that presents a dynamic portrait of an aging man trying to remember himself as a younger man. It is the product of numerous writings Kashiwagi has done over the years, a partnership with the University Press of Colorado and Professor Lane Hirabayashi, editor of the George and Sakai Aratani Nikkei in the Americas series, as well as a year of experimentation, rewriting, and honest dialogue between myself and the author. As the book's editor, I can say that the process has been a pleasure, a distinct honor, and a rare learning experience. The stories in this book, all related or based on something in the author's life, Kashiwagi recalls and reflects upon the moments, people, forces, mysteries, and choices that have made him the man he is. Starting from LOOMIS is about the things in Kashiwagi's life he can't forget. Although the stories collected here explore the author's experience from childhood on, the book differs from a conventional autobiography. This is not a simple coming-of-age story, nor does the narrative follow a neat linear logic or depict a single journey of self-realization. What distinguishes Kashiwagi's project in terms of its narrative, its content, and its form is both the positionality from which he writes and the manner in which he chooses to present his story. Just as Kashiwagi remembers and represents his world beginning in LOOMIS, his stories also reveal the life of an older man determined to look back, to return to his past, to ask himself why. Why did this happen? What does it mean? What is my story? The pieces capture a mind compelled to return to moments and sights significant to the author's life, a conscience driven to understand, explain, often laugh about, but also rework his place within the history that he's lived. Although the book does possess a timeline, his early years in the LOOMIS community, until his father's departure for a sanatorium before the war, and then to Tule Lake and the years after in part 2, the collection can also be read as a churning assemblage of remembrances, poetic musings, reimaginings, demonstrations, tangents, tall tales, and investigations. The fragmentary, non-linear, multi-generic format of his writing not only reflects the fragmentations of memory induced by such traumas as racism, forced removal, and incarceration, but can also be read as a bold personal response to the impossible conditions that he and other Nisei faced after Pearl Harbor. Demonized by the American government, press, and public, denied their civil rights, but nonetheless compelled by their government to declare their loyalties to a country that, in Kashiwagi's words, was not able to be fair or trusting in the treatment of its citizens. Kashiwagi was probably like other Japanese Americans in ultimately placing the welfare of his family over the dictates of national belonging. His work at times is also reminiscent of other writers such as Toshio Mori, Isai Yamamoto, and Wakako Yamauchi, who also wrote zuihitsu-like, zuihitsu means miscellany, zuihitsu-like short pieces consisting of personal reflections and vignettes. Yet his narrative is unique in that it is one of the few memoirs or even recorded testimonies to capture the experience of a Japanese American who would become a no-no boy, and would thus carry the stain of one deemed disloyal long after the war. In this respect, his work helps clarify, if not a mode of Japanese American writing, at least a particular predicament that all Nisei writers who survived the camp, albeit in their respective ways, have had to contend with in the years since. For Kashiwagi, as a racialized, minoritized writer, and as one who endured unjust incarceration, the act of remembrance in writing is always marked by the cloud of suspicion that was hung over his generation after Pearl Harbor. His narrative in autobiographical mode not only enacts the traumas of the past, but therein confronts a question that haunts the genre of memoir, the question of authorial reliability. How can Hiroshi Kashiwagi tell the truth of his life in a country that did not trust him? The stories in this book offer an answer to that question. The author does not pretend to speak or remember everything about the past. He does not claim to speak for all Japanese Americans. Furthermore, as all narratives born from memory, the life this book portrays lies in both the author's carefully crafted silences as well as his revelations. What Kashiwagi can do is grapple with his past, the history he lived, with honesty, humor, and a rare clarity of purpose. What he can offer is a narrative crafted with conscience and care, one informed by a sense of justice and a fidelity to the past. This is a portrait of a lifetime spent confronting the unforgettable. As readers engage with Hiroshi's stories, as we learn of his triumphs and trials, as we struggle with him through the choices he made and the times that he lived, the book makes clear the cost of discrimination and scapegoating, as well as the limitations of militarized yes, no, with us or against us thinking, both then and now, in times of war and in war's wake. In our era, an era filled with language of terror, of seemingly never-ending war, of racialized antagonisms and Islamophobia, Hiroshi's voice continues to speak, attest to the irreducibility of life to ready-made judgments or uncritical labeling, regardless of what side of the fence we seem to fall at the time. His is a voice that asks us to contend with the history that underwrites our lives, and in that light, measure the quality of conscience that we bring to our determinations. It is my distinct